Okay. Hey, everybody. Welcome to another live stream episode of Talking Timepieces, where we talk about watch collecting and horology. Uh, I hadn't done a show in a while because of the situation that's been going on. It's kind of hard to talk about something in a cheerful manner when there are people dying in Ukraine. My heart goes out to the Ukrainians. But then I saw something on Bark and Jack. Adrian was talking about how watch collecting is trivial in the face of all of this, and he's absolutely right. Watch collecting is trivial, and that's one of the reasons that I was having trouble motivating myself to do an episode. But hey, how's it going, Renee? And so, I realized that watch collecting is trivial in the face of warfare, but watches themselves actually have a critical or timekeeping end watches and timekeeping devices, clocks of all kinds are necessary not only for, well, frankly, anything considered modern warfare, because timekeeping is intrinsic to combat, sadly. Watches and warfare are wedded in a lot of ways. To start with the basics, time is critical to navigation. I have a whole episode on it, and I'll just give you a little bit of a quick, rundown. But to determine where you are on the globe, north to south, you can use a sextant. It measures the angle of the horizon and the sun. And so by measuring the angle of the sun against the horizon, you know how high up the globe you are because it's a different angle based on where you're looking from. Now, east to west is a different matter entirely because east to west is on a ball. East to west is an arbitrary direction. There are no landmarks, as it were. North to south, there are landmarks because it's the poles. That's where the Earth is spinning. So the axis is a definite reference point. But say, for example, a point on the equator, there's no way for you to know where on the equator you are. You only know that you're on the equator. Now, with a compass telling you which way is north and a sextant telling you high up or down on the globe you are, you could do a fair to middling job of navigating on the ocean or over open terrain. But in order to know exactly where you are east to west, uh, you need to know what time it is. And you need to measure what time it is where you are against a reference time of a place that you're referencing from. So, if you know how many hours difference there is between you and that point, you know how far away you are longitudinally. There's actually quite a good movie about the subject of longitude out there, and a very good book. Whichever your proclivities are, I suggest you consume one or the other because it's a fascinating story of horology. Because in the 18th century, 17th, 18th century, the British had a contest for accurate clocks that could be taken aboard a ship because obviously a clock with a pendulum can't be taken aboard a rocking ship. And in fact, that's how the balance wheel and the escapement, essentially as we know it, was invented by the British. And once they had an accurate clock, they proceeded to conquer the planet with it. Because once you have accurate navigation, you can send more ships to the same place than your enemy can, because you know where you are while they're still, trying to fumble around, only knowing half of the equation, as it were. So, right off the bat, timing is critical for navigation. Now, the next logical step is time is critical for weapons delivery, ballistics, artillery, ballistic missiles, anything that's traveling through space time. The more information you know about that path, the better off you are, and time is critical to that as well. But as far as direct navigation and even munitions today, everything's keyed off of GPS and the global positioning system. All those satellites up there, a lot of people don't really think about the signal that's coming out of those satellites. But the only thing that comes out of a GPS satellite is a time signal. That's it. A GPS satellite is just an atomic clock in a satellite in orbit, and it sends out a little signal, and the signal lets you know where you are because the multiple time chops of the multiple satellites, the computer inside the GPS receiver does all of the Doppler math, and by the time delays between the signals, the time signals from the various satellites, you know where you are on the Earth. I just realized I got the camera pointed a little high. Let me see if I can lower it a little bit. Hope I don't give anybody motion sickness for the transition. There we go. A little bit lower down. There we go. Yeah. So time is critical as a baseline for a lot of things that directly involve military capability. Like I said, just navigation, location, the ability to target precision munitions. Um, a lot of that is very time related. Now, when it comes down to time itself, for example, the bullet Accutron. It was invented in the 50s, and the first Accutron watch was sold to the public in the 60s. But in the late 50s, the Accutron movement was used in the Vanguard satellite, which meant there was a period of time when the Accutron existed and it was considered secret defense level technology, which happens sometimes. It happened to Bose, in fact, when Bose came out with their acoustic simulator. They had a machine that you could, and they probably still have it, but 20 some odd years ago. I haven't dealt with Bose in a long time, but back in those days, they had a device that you could put headphones on and plug information into the box, and it would sound like that room. And turns out that they used some interesting echolocation technologies that the American Navy thought were a little sensitive. So Bose, when they initially came out with it, they were only allowed to lease it to companies. They couldn't sell it because they didn't want to lose control of the technology. And time technology, well, actually, if you think about it, psychoacoustics and echolocation are also time based. So at the end of the day, it's still all time based. So whereas watch collecting, running around and putting them on your wrist for the sake of enjoying them is trivial in the face of war and combat. Timekeeping is essential to war and combat. So timekeeping and watches in and of themselves are not trivial at all. In fact, they've always been critical to combat, even at the watch level. In fact, I've got this Kenzel. This was a combat watch, and it doesn't have any jewels in it. It's a completely metal mechanism, like the old school Timexes, because that way you could make it very robust. May not have been as accurate as you would like it to be, but you could give it a lot of punishment. And this, to further protect the watch, had an external metal case, which has seen a lot of wear. So someone used this watch, if only in a maintenance depot, to find out what time things were. But the fact is, World War One pretty much put the dagger in the heart of pocket watches, because you cannot fight a war with a pocket watch. You can't dig in your pocket to know what time it is to start an attack while you're holding a rifle, or trying to hold a map, or drive a vehicle, or fly an aircraft, or pilot a tank. In fact, the first two male watches were made by Cartier. Prior to wartime, wristwatches were worn by women because they didn't have pockets. So watches had to overcome the feminine stigma when they first were introduced to the male marketplace. But war has a way of demonstrating that something is macho enough for you. If it's macho enough for this guy, it's macho enough for you. And so wristwatches became interesting, cool things for men to wear, because yeah, action adventure types wore wristwatches. And in fact, that's arguably the reason that Rolex is the company it is today, because Hans Wilsdorf was a genius that called for wristwatches. Rolex was a wristwatch company, not a pocket watch company. And they were relatively new on the street in 1905. And he saw the future, and it was wristwatches, and he was right. And even today, when we talk about smart wearables, they tend to take the form of wristwatches, because having a device on your wrist that you can easily look at while having your hands free is useful. Now, militarily, um, a lot of soldiers should still wear mechanical watches for a couple of very good modern reasons. Number one is you're not allowed to take an electronic device into a secure communications facility. So if you're an intelligence trooper or command level soldier, it's good to have a non RF, a non radio enabled, a non smart watch on your wrist because then you're not a sensitive information risk. In fact, there was the famous case of the soldiers deployed at a secret base that were they located the base because everyone was using their Fitbits and jogging around the base. So not only did they know the location, they also knew the perimeter of the facility because they had the traces of the soldiers running in circles around it. So wearing a smartwatch in a combat environment is not a very good idea. Hmm. Drinking Augustiner Edelstoff, a really good stuff. The Edelstoff means literally like special stuff, um, the best stuff kind of thing. Edel means, dear to your heart in German, and stuff is stuff. But yeah, so um, the ability to know what time it is without taking your hands off of what you're doing is important. And in a combat situation, you need to know what time it is to synchronize attacks, to synchronize retreats, defense, forward movement, supply runs. Everything is timed. And in fact, that's why a lot of military service academies in some countries give their graduates a watch. Russia does that. In fact, during the Cold War, well, Russia did during the Soviet era. During the Cold War, Sturmansky watches were not for sale. You couldn't. The only way you could get a Sturmansky watch is if you were part of the nomenclatura or part of the inner circle politically, or you were a graduate of one of the military service academies in the Soviet era, because you were given a Sturmansky when you graduated. In fact, Yuri Gagarin wore his graduation Sturmansky into space, which is why they gave them to their officers, because at least then they know that they all have a good watch on their wrist. And without a good watch on your wrist in a combat situation, you're only half prepared. I mean, timing is critical in a military operation, and timing is critical to military technologies. So, uh, yeah, watch collecting is a trivial pursuit in the face of war, but watches themselves are an important tool in any military. And speaking of that, like for example, I've got a Flieger. Why do you think they call them Flieger oars? This basic design, the triangle to know which way is up, and big bold numbers and big bold hands, was originally set up by the German military for their pilots. They put up specs for watches, and actually, I believe it was not just I don't want to say it was specifically the Germans that did it first, but all of the major militaries put out specifications for pilots' watches because pilots need to know what time it is. You need to know to coordinate action. And so militaries around the world made sure that their pilots had good watches. And then on the ground, a lot of soldiers started wearing field watches, watches that were specifically made to operate in the field, not necessarily waterproof to swim with, but waterproof enough to deal with mud and dirt and water, and don't need to be as big and highly legible as a pilot's watch. And in fact, excessive lume on a military field watch could cause you to get shot by being spotted. In fact, when I was in the military, I wore my watches on a tactical strap, which is a nylon strap that goes over the top of the watch to prevent the crystal from getting damaged and to prevent any light from the loom from getting out at night. So every branch of the military has a watch type. And when Jacques Cousteau invented the aqualung, that's created an entirely new world for diving watches, because in order to operate underwater properly, you need to know what time it is. And in order to operate as a military unit in a underwater fashion, everybody's got to have a watch that can handle it. In fact, I mean, look at the new Tudor, the one that just came out. It was made in conjunction with the French Navy, who still do underwater navigation drills and tests, because you need to be able to function in a non-electronic environment. I mean, which I'm going to touch on one of the aspects of watches in a war environment that applies very much today is access to batteries. A mechanical watch is better in that sense. Um, Being off the grid, like I said, in an RF sense, nobody can track your position because your watch is beaconing where you are constantly. And the whole aspect of not having to worry about this thing on your wrist that does what you want it to do, but you don't have to worry about it betraying your position or needing, batteries in a long-term field situation. Or in the case of some types of watches, an electronic watch may be useful, but if you need that kind of functionality, the military will usually give it to you in a tablet or in a electronics package that they will issue you. You don't really need electronics in the field unless they're directly involved in your job. You're not going to be using your Bluetooth to communicate with your squad members. You're going to be using the military's whatever communication system, but on your wrist, it's still good to wear a real watch. Now, let's talk about another aspect of watches in a war zone. In Russia, I just read the news. The Bulgari has reported through the roof sales, which underscores an aspect of watches today that didn't exist in the past, and that's watches as an investment. Now, in the case of Bulgari, there's talking about jewelry as well as watches, but in recent years, watches have become jewelry. Arguably, the Audemars Piguet Royal Oak was the first watch to embrace the jewelry side of it with the integrated bracelet, thus making it a bracelet watch as opposed to just a watch that you could change bracelets on. Um, but once watches became jewelry, they also became investment devices. And although you're never going to make a lot of money, and you unless it's a specialty watch, you can retain a lot of value. And in a situation where you may be a refugee, being able to carry, $50,000 in highly liquid product. I mean, if you got to bribe somebody, I'd rather try to bribe somebody with an IWC that I happen to pull off my arm than a gold bar I happen to have hidden because number one, the gold isn't going to be very useful in a seriously bad environment, and the watch will be the people who you're going to be bribing are going to probably be young people who would find more use in a watch than in a piece of gold anyway. So, I mean, as a medium of barter in a tight spot, or as a way to take large values with you in a manner that is easy to transport, because you could literally just strap 5 or 6 to each arm and carry 10 watches with you, and you would at least have something if you were in a refugee situation. And I'm not, like I said, I'm not even trying to play light. I'm not saying, collect watches because you might one day be a refugee. But what I'm trying to point out is while watch collecting as a hobby is a relatively, yeah, it's a hobby. It's a trivial exercise. Having watches as a value store is not a trivial idea. Um, like I said, you could strap several watches to each arm and find yourself in an environment where you literally have the clothes on your back, and you still at least have something on your body. And the paper money in your money belt ain't going to go very far in a seriously bad situation. So you really have to think about it in that sense as well. So, having said all of that, watches are important in a war zone. Watches are important for military operations. Timekeeping is critical for military. Um, it's the nature of the beast. But I wish we didn't have to think about it. I wish we didn't have to think about war. I wish we didn't have to think about the situation that we're all facing. I wish we didn't have to worry about the terror that so many poor people are facing in the refugee crisis that is building. I'm here in Germany, and I mean, I can only hope that everything gets sorted out, and this ends without a atrocious level of bloodshed and death because, I mean, the Russians are openly bombarding cities, developed cities. I mean, you can say, yeah, I'm being insensitive to say, oh, they're Europeans and, that's why we're being disturbed. But we're not supposed to be doing this here. Theoretically, we have developed the political systems in this continent enough to the point where we shouldn't have to worry about it, but we obviously haven't. So we obviously are not civilized enough either. If we're worried about the same issues and we're suffering from the same problems, then we need to really take a cold, hard look at ourselves and the systems that we've developed. But I don't really want to go any more into this aspect. I would much rather talk about watches and watch collecting and horology and some of the things that we can talk about on a positive front. And so, if anybody has any questions, I'd love to answer them, or any topics that don't involve current events. And let's talk about that. As you all know, the primary reason I love doing these live streams is to chat with you, not so much to pontificate about whatever pet peeve I have at the moment. So, how about you, Renee? You got anything you wanted to talk about? If not, we can talk about what's going on some of the other channels. Like I said, I do like the fact that Adrian over at Bark and Jack stepped up and said something about the situation, because not too many of us are talking about what's going on in the world, and we all live in it. But as far as other things, on the more trivial side, everyone's speculating what's going to happen with Rolex. Are they going to come out with any new models? Are they going to discontinue any models? And full disclosure, I put myself on the waiting list at my local AD for an Air King, and maybe I'll get it. Maybe I won't. Who knew? They might discontinue it before I come up on the list. But as much as I don't like the blingy Rolexes, I like their Thule watches. Like I said, I rebought an Explorer 2, and I think the Air King is a very cool watch. It's a very non blingy Rolex watch. It's not a kind of watch that you would wear as an elegant suit watch. It still harkens back to Rolex's sportier days. But then, like I said a lot, Tudor is the new Tudor is the old Rolex, and they're the ones that are making the really cool mainstream sports watches today. Rolex is just trying very hard to become one of the triumvirate. But having said that, I wouldn't mind seeing a Black Bay 58 GMT, or something interesting from the Rolex main line. But I don't think we're going to see that. I think we are going to see some interesting things out of Tudor downstream. Maybe a North Flag with something other than that yellow as the colors on the dial. The North Flag could do with a reissue right now, or maybe even a GMT in a different color pattern. So the Rolex has some opportunities to do some things that aren't too wild and crazy, but would still make everybody go nuts. But it all depends on the market, right? And what's selling. But I think we could definitely see something out of those people. Now, as far as the rest of the market goes, there's been some very interesting things going on in the at in the mainstream, as it were. There's a lot of talk about the PRX, the two-tone gold one that they came out with, and it may not be worth the additional price margin, but considering what you're getting, it's still the best piece of that nature, two-tone mechanical automatic watch integrated bracelet that you're going to find out there. So the Tissot PRX is still your best value. I know people who wouldn't necessarily buy it because they think Tissot is at the lower edge of Swiss watch hierarchy. But considering the depth of Tissot's heritage, I think that's just, yeah, I don't know. I think that's trying to overbin because any of the watches within the Swatch Group are all good pieces, and in the mainstream, a Tissot in my mind is as good as anything else within its price category. You know, if you look at some of the Longines in the same price category, they're of an equal caliber. If you look at, say, a Mito or an Oris, in the $1,000 watch range, there are a lot of nice pieces out there. But frankly, I do believe that the Tissot PRX is probably the best value in that price category. Let's see. Um, any questions from the audience? Any ideas you'd like to go over? I recognize, like I said, it's not the most charming time to really get into a conversation. Hey, how's it going, UK Carl? Uh, welcome to the show. You know, if we don't really, get the mood up today because of the current situation, I can understand. You know, we can end the show in at the end of at the half hour. Oh, Captain David, well, if you had something you want to talk about, we were just debating, what we can discuss in the show. If you had something that we could chat, or you had any questions, I'd be more than happy to explore that. Peace to all, exactly. Peace to all. Peace and long life, as the Vulcans said. You know, until we no longer need weapons, right? Let's hope. But actually, like I said, timekeeping is a weapon like anything else. Accurate timekeeping is critical to military operations. But like I said, I'd rather not dwell on that. If you had any other things, I was going to make the episode about talking about watch tools and going through the various things, and I'll do that next week's episode. And what we'll do is we'll talk about what tools you need if you're just basic collector, which is primarily strap tools. What kind of tools you need if you're a more advanced collector. You may want to open up the watch even if you don't work on it, because you might want to check to see if it's real, if it's a watch that you're not sure about. Like in the case of Rolex, sometimes the only way to really be sure it's a real Rolex is to look and see if it's a free sprung balance. And then at least it's a very expensive clone if it's not a real Rolex, at least. But and then of course, once you're an advanced, collector, you may actually do some watch making things. But the average collector, beyond swapping straps and batteries, is all you need to do. And you do need the right tools for that, because if you don't have the right tools, you'll scratch your watch. Because the key with a good tool is not that it's fancy or it has a big handle, or it might be easier to use and comfortable because it's a well-made watch, but tool. But the key is that the business end of the tool, the edges need to be sharp. The angles need to be clean. If it's a screwdriver, it needs to have clean, sharp, straight edges, because if the tool doesn't fit the screw head properly, it'll slip and scratch the watch. If the blade doesn't get up underneath the back of the watch properly, it's going to slip and scratch the watch. So we'll go over that and cases too next week. So that'll be we're just going to push the tool episode to next week. But today we'll talk about ooh watches. Lunchbox says, "Are we going to boycott Vostok watches?" Um, Sadly, yeah. Um, Luckily, I don't have one in my collection right now. I'd feel guilty about it. But then again, it was purchased in the past. And again, sadly, there is military horological history in Russian watches. The Vostok Amphibia was directly made so that the Soviet Union could compete in underwater demolition stuff without having access to the Swiss marketplace. But that's a good point, Lunchbox. We have to remember we're all in this together. And yeah, I don't think I'll be buying a Russian watch anytime soon, and I uh, won't review anytime soon, even though I have access to some. Because yeah, you're right. Every little gesture helps, and we should take all of the gestures and add to it some actions. And but if all we can do are make gestures to help support morale and to help show where our feelings are, at least to show that we've picked a side, I go for it. That's actually not a bad idea, Lunchbox. Anything else anybody wanted to bring up? Otherwise, we can talk about other things that are going on in the timing industry. One of the things everybody keeps forgetting is all of this expansion in the Internet of Things and edge computing and the like. All requires accurate timing, and so IEEE 1588, and there are some of the other protocols. The engineering community has to constantly keep an eye on how machines talk to each other and keep time between each other. And since we're moving into a new world of internet connectivity, there are actually newer timing solutions and ways to deal with timing that are being brought out as well. So, keep an eye out for some interesting things going on in the electronic space that involve timing. Let's see. UK Carl, have you seen the Ball Roadmaster GMT? I think they're really nice. They come in many different colors and limited editions. Hey, Nuno, how's it going? How's it going? Well, UK Carl, Ball is a fantastic. Ball's problem is the problem of a lot of early pioneering watch companies. Is they did a lot of cool stuff in the past, and because of market pressures and things that might have happened, they've been put on their heels, and they're trying to come back. And Ball's a perfect example of that. I mean, ball, the term "get on the ball" doesn't mean balance on a round object. It meant get yourself a ball watch, because when America was expanding and the railroads were going out, and there were a couple of horrific accidents because the conductors didn't know what time it was properly. And not only did America implement and properly enforce time zones across the United States, but they also, a man named Ball was a watchmaker, and he became the watch timing chief for the railroads, and went from railroad station to railroad station, making sure conductors' watches were within a few seconds a fortnight. Pardon me. And it was that accuracy in the rail system that enabled the railroads to become safer. And so Ball watches have a tremendous legacy. And their big thing, how companies have a thing, right? You have to have a thing to be recognized. Balls still use a lot of loom, and not painted on loom. Almost all ball watches have got the helium in little capsules, little glass capsules, because you can it lasts longer, and you can do more with it as far as intensity. Because one of the biggest reasons luminous paints stop working is the other materials in the paint flake off or lose their intensity. And well, we don't even use radioactive loom anymore, with the exception of a few companies that still use painted helium, you know, radioactive paint. But like I said, that doesn't work very well in the long run. And matter of fact, you're not even allowed to use radioactive paint anymore. You can only use encapsulated, which is why Ball still uses radioactive helium indices, because they're all encapsulated. They don't use paint at all in a ball, but they're radioactive, so they go all the time. You can put a ball in a closet for a week, and it'll be just as bright then than it was when you put it in, because it's radioactive indices. They'll start fading in about 30 to 40 years, because I believe the half-life of helium-3 is about 35 years. And so you'll lose about half intensity, and then in another 35 years, you'll lose about another half of that intensity. So it'll go down about a half again from that point. But essentially, a ball watch, very visible, great legacy. I mean, they use modern movements, so obviously, they're on par with any other mechanical watch of its price range. And they've got, like I said, as you point out, UK Carl, they come in a lot of different colors, and some companies will charge an arm and a leg just to sell it to you in a different color. Rolex. And so, yeah, Ball's a good company. If I didn't have other watches that I would rather own at this point, budget wise, you're always trying to think of what you can afford. I'd have a Ball in my collection. They're nice watches. They are. They really are good pieces, and they're offered in enough of a variety of styles and colors that you can find something you like. They even have a couple where the indices are all in different colors. The little helium capsules is a really cool watch. So yeah, I would look into it if I were you, UK Carl. Why not? And a GMT's my well, I love a moon phase. Uh, love a chrono, but GMT is one of is up there as well. I think GMT is one of my favorite uh, complications, and a GMT complication is functional. It's useful. You can track what's going on in another time zone. You find out when your mom is awake, so you can give her a call. So, let's see. Anything else that we were going to chat about? We still got a little bit of time left in the episode. Um, Anything? Because if not, because of the situation going on right now, I don't really feel a tremendous need to draw the episode out unless you all had something you wanted to talk about, and then we can pick this all up next week, and hopefully the geopolitical situation will be nicer, and we'll be in better spirits to talk about watches. But I missed last week's live stream, and I wanted to come on at least to say, I miss you all, and I wish we had better times and better things to talk about. And at the minimum, point out that while watch collecting may be a trivial pursuit, watches themselves and timekeeping are vitally important to the military and to soldiers. So, yeah, we'll call it. I think, yeah, we'll call it. We'll call it an evening. Thank you all for taking the time to be here with us, and let's hope we have something a little bit better mood next week. So when we get together and talk about tools, um, we'll be a little happier about it. But in the meantime, all of you, I love you all. Take care. God bless, and have a great week.